Hello. So let's start our chess part of the course. Let's have a look at this position. White have just played e2, e4, best by test, as Fischer, I think, said. I don't know if it's still the case. The database nowadays is huge, so don't know if e4 is still doing better than any other move. But let's start logically analyzing the situation already at the beginning, because this is the idea of our course to get, to get this certain, logical concepts and some ideas about the openings. And to me, I was thinking about it. I don't know why, but was thinking about it, and I understood that it must be the best move in the position, actually. E4. Why? Because, we all know how the opening should be played. So the main ideas of any of the opening play is to fight for the center, to develop pieces, and to try to castle, as soon as possible, and then to develop every piece or almost every piece, and then to start to do something. So e4 actually is a move which is the quickest way of doing so. So first of all, it's fighting for the center. Secondly, it opens up the diagonal for the bishop, so the knight will jump anyway to f3 most likely. And the difference with d4 is that it helps white to castle quicker. So theoretically, at least, white can castle already on move 4, and that happens from time to time, at least on move 5. Which is not the case on d4. So white, after d4, white delays castle. Okay, those are, of course, very general considerations, but still, it must be the best move in the position. Even if, of course, the game of chess is a draw, At the end of the day, with perfect play, it's only that it's not so easy to demonstrate this perfect play. But anyways, let's say, it's a serious move, to consider. So let us quickly go through the main ideas of the opening. As I've mentioned already, development, fighting for the center, trying to get your king into the safe place, as soon as possible. But then, of course, while your opponent is also doing something, then some things can change. This is a general kind of ideal plan, but it can, you can do something else if the situation asks you to do it. So after e4, logically, of course, for black, normally the best moves should be some moves which in this or that way are fighting for the center. That's why in this particular, so we will start actually with the moves which do not. Here, so I start from the kind of dubious openings. Some of them are really dubious. Some are not that bad actually, but obviously shouldn't be enough to equalize, even though still playable under some circumstances. So let's start with moves like, just if you want for fun, like a6. Of course, I understand it's a mistake. It must be a mistake because it doesn't, you're not fighting for the center. Also, you're not helping your king to get to a safe place as quick as possible. Even though I must tell you, I don't know if you know it, but playing this move, Tony Miles, he managed to beat in classical chess Anatoly Karpov, I think in the 70s somewhere, or maybe beginning of 80s, I don't remember. But so it shouldn't be such a bad move. It still doesn't lose again. I don't know how come did he manage, but you can have a look at this game at some point, if you want. But if I remember well, he actually got a very nice position very quickly out of the opening. I don't know how. But in any case, of course, objectively, it's not the move to be recommended. So as a rule, when you're facing something random, some kind of strange opening play, especially playing white, it's always, good just to follow the basic rules. So I've never analyzed the move a6, but I suppose that the logical way is just to play d4, let's say b5. That's what black usually do. Knight f3, bishop b7, bishop d3, followed by castle, rook e1. And then you will find a way, how to proceed. So you just play logical move, you take the center, you castle, and you are better. So this kind of move is not something why it would stop you to play e4. Same goes for b6. It's another way. It's maybe a little bit better because at least you don't lose a tempi, but still pretty bad. I think I've played once this in some junior event, just wanted to avoid theory, but of course, I actually even won the game if I remember well, but of course it shouldn't be good. So you just develop in the same fashion, e6, knight f3. And now, there are some people who like to avoid theory and they play this kind of setup for black. I think actually I've played even Hikaru Nakamura in Blitz. He has played it once against me without much success. I think Hikaru got totally crushed very quickly with it. It's not really something recommendable against strong players, even in Blitz. But the setup is something like this. So black is trying to develop in this way, g6, bishop g7, and then d6, trying to put his knights to d7, e7, h6, a6, and then maybe g5, maybe castle. Well, obviously it is not good. I mean, white can react in many different ways. Almost anything gives an advantage to white. But, maybe this is the way to play against a much weaker opponent. Really, who is much weaker, even though usually in such cases you can manage to outplay him in a little bit more solid openings and not to give a chance, because here the white's play is too simple. So I think at least, again, anything is good, but I think I put the pawn on c4. Why not? Something like that, knight c3, knight e7. Let's say you just develop pieces. At some point you have a full control on the center. Let's say if castle, you just put pieces on the center. One day you start to push d5, e5, I don't know, maybe bishop h6, change the bishop. This is not serious. White is simply much better. Or let's say if black is trying h6, I think that's even Spassky. He used to play a bit like this at some point, just then trying to get g5, but of course without development. I mean, something like, I suppose, queen d2 and d5 followed by knight d4. I think it just gives white a big advantage for free. So those are really not the moves which I would recommend you to play even in Blitz. Then what about move g6? That would very often lead to transposition to the Pirc defense, which is usually starting with d6. So let's say d4, bishop g7, and anyways black most of the time is playing later on d6, and that I will investigate in a chapter, in a lesson which will be about the Pirc defense, all ins and outs for both scholars of this Pirc defense. So that we will leave for the later. There is a move knight c6 here. Also, it's not too bad. It's just that it doesn't make much sense because the point is that after d4, of course, very logical, black wants to play d5. Of course, he wants to counter now in the center. Still, it's not that bad. Still, I believe white should have certain advantage. e5, bishop f5. Of course, knight on c6 is not the best piece, but black wants to get some f6 and, trying to fight against the center very quickly. I personally like, for example, the idea to have the knight on g3, something like this, bishop e2, f6, f4. So to e6, c3, for example, to keep the center. But that is playable for black. It's not too bad. I would say probably white has a plus, but it's, again, you can play it as black. The main problem is that what to do after simple knight f3. And that is a big issue, because now it seems like the only way to have a more or less reasonable game is to play e5, which would lead you to first e5. So then it doesn't make much sense to start with knight c6, which simply gives white an additional, quite serious opportunity to play d4. And after knight f3, anyway, you play e5, because other moves are pretty, more than dubious. For instance, d6, d4, knight on c6 is doing nothing. White is just better. well, another idea is after knight f3 to play d5, but that is a bad Scandinavian. By the way, Scandinavian is also we are, of course, I'm going to cover, but knight on c6 is too early. And for instance, here, this is a theoretical line where black really shouldn't get his knight to c6 so quickly, and white is much better. So basically, knight c6 just, to me, doesn't make much sense to start with it, unless you find some good move here other than e5. I couldn't manage. I invite you if you want to search for it, but I have my doubts you will find anything better than e5. So let's now come back to more serious openings. One of it is knight f6. It's an invention, or at least it's called after Alekhine, the fourth world champion, a genius player, of course. I think he had discovered lots of things in chess, and 99% of it were better than this knight f6 defense. But anyways, it's not too bad. I mean, I will try to go into detail here. What can I say about knight f6? The main advantage playing black this opening is that white usually is not extremely well prepared against it, because nobody spends too much time analyzing it. And also, it's not too bad. It's objectively not too bad. So if black, of course, black cannot equalize with it. So of course, it's not playing, this is not playing for equality. It's more, some players rarely on the grandmaster level, because it will be quite difficult to live with it for too long, having good results. But on a more club level or internet, amateurs level, it's a playable opening, because usually people who play it with black, they know very well all the ins and outs, all the details, nuances of the opening, and white's players most often do not. The only problem is that actually you don't need to know that much with white to have a nice position. But I will show you now that it's a playable opening. I mean, I cannot recommend it to players of, let's say, grandmaster level 25 plus 2600 to include it seriously in the repertoire, even though from time to time it's playable. I mean, I remember quite recently. Even Magnus Carlsen, he had played it, and actually I think he beat Hikaru Nakamura with knight f6 in some rapid games. So it's possible to have it as a surprise in your repertoire. Then another question is if it's worth an effort to study all this just to play maybe once a year from time to time this opening. But anyway, it is an option. But for the level of, let's say, 2,000 players or less, it is perfectly playable. Nothing wrong with this move, really. If you know what you do, as I've mentioned already, you'll not get too bad position. So, and you might even, take over the initiative very quickly, because, again, your opponents do not know it so well. So e5 is very logical, knight d5. d4. Well, c4, it's knight b6 doesn't bring that much. Okay, of course, you can play d4 here, but if you're trying just to chase the knight, it's not a big deal, because here that was Alekhine's idea, that the concept of it is that white is overexposed in a way. It spawns on e5 and c5, and you can counterattack it very quickly. And here black's position is fine. So that's why usually white is playing d4. d6, well, you need to counterattack here. You need to fight against the center. And so white has, I would say, three different systems here, serious systems. One is, let's say, c4, knight b6, and now f4. This is the most principal way of playing with white, because, you just want to keep the center, to keep all this, all those central pawns, and if white manages it without certain direct counterplay from the black side, of course, black's position will be rather critical. But at least according to the nowadays theory, black is doing more or less okay here. d5, f5, knight c6, attacking the center, bishop e3, because I guess knight f3 would go, there is bishop g4, for example, after knight f3. So bishop e3, bishop f5. Well, you develop the knights like this, knight f3, bishop b4. This is a theoretical position. There is still, well, quite some theory here, and that is actually what was played in Nakamura-Carlsen game. It seems that it's at least playable, if not maybe even fine for black. So yeah, that system is very principled, but for white, but probably it's not the best system. Even though if you're playing at black, you need really to know exactly what you are doing, because white managed to keep the center here. Another very solid system, which I would recommend you if you want to play it with white, if you just don't want to study much theory, is to play the c4, knight b6, and then now just simply e takes d6. It is a bit of it's not extremely I would say aggressive way of playing. I mean, it's not very principled, because you exchange your e5 pawn, which is bothering black, but it is simple, and I think it gives white a certain plus, but not too also very playable for black. So black has now a choice of taking e d6 or c d6. That leads to a very different types of position. Most of the players play e takes d6. I think that c d6 is playable. Let's say knight c3, and then black is trying in this type of position to play g6 and to develop bishop g7, castle, knight c6, e5, something like that. So now white, there are a lot of transpositions to the other lines, like knight f3, g6 here. Well, maybe white can always play knight f3. This is one type of kind of standard way of playing. Bishop g7, h3, castles, bishop e2. So each side develops pieces. Knight c6, castle, bishop f5. White is usually playing some healthy move here, but it's not, the position is probably a bit in white's favor, but it's not so easy, not so simple, this position, because black has e5, but also d5 sometimes ideas. For example, if white tries to play b3, then maybe already d5 is not so bad, because there is some issue with the d4 pawn. For example, if c5, you can go, I don't know, knight c8, maybe even knight d7 possible, then bishop e4, and then d4 pawn is, as you see, is quite vulnerable. So that's why maybe b3 is not needed for white. Yeah, now if d5, c5, you definitely don't need b3. But yeah, usually rook e1, rook c8, and this type of position when black is trying to find the best moment to play whether e5, whether d5, depending on what white is doing. White has a certain quite a nice pawn structure, but black's pieces are active. Yeah, so if you play it with white, you need really to know what you do in the next coming moves. Because the c4 pawn is a bit vulnerable, e5, d5 coming. So, but I think objectively it's still a bit better for white. If I remember well, for example, a3 for some reason is an interesting move here. So you need to be able, after e5 to get some reaction. I think the main idea is that once black is playing e5 here, then white very often, or sometimes he takes d5, but I think very often he reacts in this way, like bishop g5, and let's say if f6, bishop e3, and then trying to play on the queen side here. Well, but playable position for black and for white also. Another way here in this move order, if it's about this move order, then white can try to play bishop e3, for example, bishop g7, rook c1, trying to, first to develop the flank, and then on the castle, knight f3, bishop g4, bishop e2, knight c6. Again, black is quickly trying to counterattack the center, and it's okay. It's a position a bit maybe better for white. Now black wants to take on f3 and take on c4. And I think the main line goes like d5, black takes on f3, knight e5, b3. Now you take this bishop, queen f3, and black is usually trying to play something like knight d7, followed by a6, or a6 first, knight d7, trying to get b5. White has a bit of a space, but probably a bit better position, but nothing too bad for black. Yeah, so that is very playable for both sides. But more often, I think black players, they try to take with e-pawn, and now white usually just trying to develop the pieces and having a bit of a better center and the knight on b6, which for example, makes it difficult for black to play d5 because then c5 comes with tempi. So here, both sides are developing usually. Probably better is to start with bishop e7, because if you start with knight c6, there is some additional idea for white to go d5. And after knight e5, there is f4, because you cannot take the pawn on c4, because white takes and then checks on a4 and takes the knight back. So that is not working. So black has to retreat, and then bishop d3, followed by knight e2 or knight f3, castles, and white has quite some space advantage. So let's say bishop e7 then, and now white has two setups. One is to try to put the knight on e2, another one is more simple, is to play just knight f3. Let's say castle bishop e2, bishop g4 is logical, at some point h3, bishop h5, castle knight c6. Now again, bishop takes f3 is already threatening, so b3, and bishop f6, bishop e3. Okay, black is very active here, he managed to press the center and so on, but still, if white manages to counter all black's actions, he still has a space advantage. So probably this position is a bit in white's favor. For instance, h6, queen d2, rook d5, otherwise you just go rook d1. At some point, black has to do something, c5, knight c8, trying to go knight e7, but rook a d1, and so on. It shouldn't be too bad, black's position, but white has a nice game also. So that is the system, which is c4, playing here c4, knight b6, and taking on d6. So black has an option to take with a c-pawn or with e-pawn. This is simple for white in a way, but definitely not a refutation of Alekhine defense, if there is any refutation. I personally consider knight f3 to be a more dangerous move, because, again, it doesn't lead to, in quite many lines, it doesn't lead to a very big advantage for white, but kind of pleasant pressure with a simple play. So there are not so many, there are a lot of systems in theory here for black, but not too many where you can take over initiative, where somehow which makes you dream about playing this opening. For instance, the moves like c6, also playable, but so what? Bishop e2 or first c4, knight c7, bishop e2, then you castle. Well, you play just as in those examples with a6 move and so on. You just play healthy chess, castle, knight c3, and definitely white has an advantage. How big is an advantage is maybe a matter of discussion, but he is better and not much risk to get under any counterplay. Then there is, that is quite interesting. There is a d5 move, knight takes e5, and now knight d7. It's actually a very funny system because it makes some sense, and it was played, I think, in candidate match. If I remember well, the first game of Tal against Larsen candidate match, and it's a first game and so on. And can you imagine Mikhail Tal that after very long, he spent some 20 minutes here, and he decided to go back knight f3, which is of course a decent move. Let's say 6 bishop e2. White is still probably a bit better, but nothing too bad for black. And I think that actually Larsen, he even won this game with black, even though he lost the match at the end of the day. But Mikhail Tal, by the way, was very famous. Was very well known for playing terribly the first round always. So I guess he needed some time to get into the tournament, to get his head working on the full mount. And that was a very serious force when he was managing it. So, but the funny thing is that, of course, Mikhail Tal, he knew that knight takes f7 is a big test of knight d7 move. And of course, at that time, there were no computers. So, but still, I remember, I think I read some of his interview when he said that he was losing this game playing knight f3 was a punishment not to take on f7. Of course, he was afraid of certain preparation of Bent Larsen, but still it's like, Tal not taking on f7, that sounds crazy. And actually now with computers, they prove that this is basically a refutation of this move, even though not like you are winning by force, but you just have a terribly strong attack here with white. So it's getting pretty forced. King takes f7, queen h5 check, which forces black to play king e6. And now c4, knight f6 has to be played, d5 check, king d6. If bishop f4 check, I think black can do like e5 or something. So queen f7 now. And this position was a subject of discussion for quite some time before computer era. I remember even still in the beginning of 90s. But now computers, well, I can just tell you the statistics. I think I have in my database, like, I don't know, close to 1,000 games here on this position of computers. And the statistics is something like 97% for white, which probably means that this is a bad idea to play it. But white needs to know how to react here. And I just show you quickly the main lines, like knight b8, c5 check for some reason, don't ask me why, king d7, computers are playing bishop b5 check, and this line castles, queen a5, because otherwise losing the queen, check, check, and simply going bishop e2, and 98% statistics out of, I don't know, 400 games, which probably means that white has a slight plus here. Or knight e5 is another move, and that was bishop f4, c5. And that was considered to be not so clear, but now computers are playing knight c3, threatening knight b5, a6, and now b4 is a very strong move. And after b4, again, the same statistics, like 300 games, 90, I don't know, 5% at minimum for white, so probably it is just bad for black. Anyway, this is more maybe just for fun, but probably the best move here is to play c6. But well, it reminds a little bit the Caro-Kann, which again we are going to study later. Caro-Kann kind of position, but yeah, white, it's a kind of good, nice Caro-Kann for white. So white has a few ways to be somewhat better, but not too bad. So this I can recommend you also as an option for black. If you want to play it black, it's not too bad. So next, black wants to play knight d7 to kick this knight out and then to finish his development, and to play a typical Caro-Kann position if he manages to finish his development. But yeah, so let's say bishop c4, knight d7, or maybe for white is interesting is to play knight d2, knight d7, knight df3, just trying to keep this knight on e5, which is active. Definitely, it's not, well, white will end up with a certain advantage out of the opening, but black is rather safe in the sense to get into a very big trouble. That shouldn't happen after d5. So then for me, for a very long time, the main line was bishop g4, bishop e2, e6. But frankly, I find it not very promising for black because, yeah, there were a lot of games, let's say castle, bishop e7, c4, knight b6, knight c3. So white is playing healthy chess. I just want to know that, let's say, black should castle h3. You can also start with bishop e3, but h3 first. So the idea is that after bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, so c4 pawn is not hanging, yeah, because there is bishop takes b7. So that is why black is usually playing bishop h5, and now simply bishop e3. And this position seems to be simply very unpleasant for black. I mean, very easy to play with white. So I would rather recommend you, if you want this type of position, then probably to get g6, bishop g7, yeah, because white will probably sooner or later take ed, cd, but then bishop on g7 is more active. So here, a lot of games in the history of chess, but statistics is pretty bad, and the position is, I would say, not recommendable from my point of view to play, because it's simply slightly better for white and very easy play. So let's say, I think if knight c6, if black goes knight c6, then white simply gets some plus, I think, playing, for example, like this, simply d5, and if ed5, knight d5, if I remember well, yeah, white has a very nice plus here. Or let's say, quite often black would try to play like this, d5, c5, take on f3, I guess with the idea if bishop takes f3, knight c4 is playable, but white is usually taken on f3 with a pawn, knight c8, f4. And I don't know why, but this position was played pretty often. I mean, players who liked this Alekhine defense, they tried to like Bagirov, in the past, players in the 70s or 80s, they try to defend this position, but to me it is obviously pretty bad, and it is actually, nowadays computers assassinate is like +1, and I guess it's very, I would say, settled assessment. I think it's simply better for white tactically, because white wants to get f5 very often, but also just strategically. So black has a certain potential, maybe if he gets his knight to f5 one day, but even though, no, this is not something I would recommend you playing with black. So my recommendation finally against knight f3, if you want to play it with black, is to investigate g6. Even here, g6 move, I would even go that far to say that the whole idea of playing this opening, is, in my opinion, is actually based on the conclusion of is g6 playable or not, because otherwise I don't see any prospect really for black there. But after g6, I couldn't personally find anything very substantial for white, and it's there are a couple of forced lines which are tricky, but it seems that it's holding for black, and otherwise it's definitely playable for black. So even though white, I still like white in some lines here. For instance, of course with white you can play always a c4 and now knight b6 ed. As I've mentioned already, then cd, and to get into this position, like h3, that's what I've mentioned already. So I would say this position white has again after g6, but it's not that simple, I would say. So the main move for white is bishop c4, the most principal move. Bishop c4, black retreats, bishop b3, bishop g7. So of course black wants to castle and then to start some action in the center, c5, attacking on e5 pawn. Makes a lot of sense, this kind of play. And so now white, in theory, white has two very direct ways to try to refute it. One is knight g5, e6, but I couldn't find, at least myself. Of course, if powerful computers one day, if you work and you find an advantage here, that would probably mean that the g6 line is not playable and the whole Alekhine's defense is not extremely prosperous, but I'm not sure, at least, for instance, if white is trying to play f4, then black has some counterplay like this, c5, started then c3, knight c6, so some counterplay things are not easy, not clear. And the main move is queen f3 now, so white, you see, is starting very direct assault. And if castle, then queen h3 is really quite dangerous. H6, and now even knight e4 is quite unpleasant, which forces black to play d5, and then knight c5 just followed by c3, even though white has some issues with development, so maybe black will be in time here to break through in the center, but strategically it's dangerous. But also knight f3 is pretty dangerous, d5, d5, and there is a certain issue with the king side and potential attack white can have. So castles at least is considered to be dubious. But after queen e7, the idea is knight e4. Very, very direct idea for white. And even though h6 seems to be playable, I'm not sure is it too good, but it's playable. But after the direct d5, this position has to be analyzed. One thing I can tell that there is no direct refutation, and it's very unclear position. So the one who analyze it better will have a serious advantage in a practical game. So one move is bishop g5, the most logical. But then, strangely enough, I don't know why, don't ask me why, but this check c3, queen a5, and so on and so on. You need to check this position, but computers cannot find any substantial advantage for white here, even though it looks not very nice. But or d takes e5, and now h6. Now, for some reason, you really need to stop bishop g5 already. And knight f6 check, king f8. This position also needs to be analyzed, complicated. I think for white the best move is queen c3, and I invite you to analyze it with either color if you want, but probably it's a bit more favorable for white, but not too bad for black also. So then another idea is to start with a4. Because now all those lines, for some reason, don't ask me why, if black plays automatically a5, then those lines with knight g5, actually also another queen e2 move, is also is more probably favorable for white. But knight g5, e6, and now both f4, and especially queen f3, queen e7, knight e4. For some reason, with a4, a5, computer is already saying that this is pretty dangerous for black. So he thinks that a4, a5 is in white's favor. But strange enough, after a4, there is d5, and now if white wants to play for advantage, he needs to go to this complicated position. Takes knight g5 check, king g8, knight e6, queen e8, knight takes e7, queen d8. So white at least can repeat moves, but if he wants to play for a win, he takes rook on e8 and e takes d4, and this position is totally unclear because, of course, very strange position. White is exchange up, but his knight on e8 is in danger. From other point of view, black has his king on g8 with rook on h8. But this position has to be investigated, but I think it's quite okay for black, very unclear. So that's why if you want to avoid all those complications as white, you can just play queen e2. I think it's a very nice solid move, which keeps some plus for white. Maybe it's not a refutation of this g6 system, but still it's a kind of economical way for white to play, not to learn too much. So castle h3, and now, well, since a5, a4 is not played, I think the best considers to be now for black is to play knight c6, and then to use after castles to play knight a5 to try to get this bishop, because he is having a certain issue in the center. Of course, white has this quite unpleasant pawn on e5, so at least in exchange black takes this bishop on b3. So he's got two bishops here. Let's say take first, or maybe one or two moves later, bishop f5, and this type of position, let's say rook e1, I don't know, a5 or whatever, bishop f4. Well, nothing too bad, nothing dramatic for black. Pretty acceptable position. Still, I would prefer white because, well, he has center control in the center, and followed by rook d1, a certain play probably connected with the center on the king side. But again, this is also playable for black as well. So that is it about the Alekhine defense. Okay, very short summary of this opening. Of course, if you want to go deeper with either color, you need to study more games, to switch on engines. But so finally, let's make a short summary. That moves like a6, b6, whatever, they're not great. So if g6 we will consider later, knight c6, at minimum there is knight f3, and you can probably have to play e5, so it doesn't make much sense. So Alekhine defense, knight f6, e5, knight d5 is not refuted. It is playable for black. If you want to play it with black as a surprise weapon, or especially as your main repertoire, you need to study quite a lot. You need definitely to study this system with f4, because that is a very, very dangerous principal system. So there are three major systems. Another is just taking on d6 and development, and of course the most unpleasant somehow, I find knight f3 for black, which white is just playing very solid chess. I would recommend you also as white to play it. You need to study a little bit more, but in general, you don't need so much opening knowledge here because the play is healthy. White is just playing healthy moves, developing. And here, from all system, again, I would advise you with black whether to take on e5 and let's say play c6 followed by knight d7, a very solid choice. You will not get too bad position here with black. But if you want to play something a bit more tricky, I would say, to get a chance to play sharper games, and you play g6, but then as black you need to know all the nuances, especially of this position, of this knight g5 ideas. So there you need to analyze it well to make sure that you're not going to end up in a bad position immediately out of the opening. Otherwise, after moves like queen e2, it will not happen definitely, but white might get a certain advantage, but you will get a game with black. And with white, so other way around, there is always an option to play this type of position. For example, here, which you can work on a bit, and if you like it, it's a very valid choice. Otherwise, here again, if you want to refute the g6 move, you try to analyze knight g5 until an advantage. But if you don't have time or wish, to spend too much time on this quite a rare opening, playing white, I would recommend you to play queen e2, h3, and just to get a normal game with not a very big advantage, but solid, healthy position like this, and then you just play it, further on. I mean, but it's not a refutation, of course. So that is all what I wanted to say about the Alekhine defense, and now we will move to e4 d5, which is a Scandinavian defense. There is a bit more there of theory and of ideas. So that will be the subject of our next part of those rare openings, which I want to start with.